Hello there, I'm Mr. Archistool and I'm here for video 6 in our Historic Environment video series looking at the British sector of the Western Front. And in this video it's hopefully going to be quite a compact video, which is looking at 3 major treatments that were applied to deal with those illnesses and wounds that we saw in video 5. So video 5 introduced the idea of the wounds that you got as a result of the conditions like trench foot and trench fever. It also looked at the kind of inflictions that the human body went through once it had shrapnel and gunshot and gas applied to it, and what the problems were. Now what we're going to do is we're going to end our video, so this is going to be one of the last 2 videos, which is looking at how they actually treated people on the Western Front. So first of all, let's go through those 3 different methods. And these methods were all devised before the First World War. So actually they were used in the First World War, and what happened is that there were potential uses for them and also potential problems with them as well. First one is aseptic medicine, aseptic surgery. So asepsis is this idea of creating a completely sterile environment that you can work with your hands and to kind of keep the environment clean of infection. And that is linked to Pasteur's work that we saw in the 19th century and Joseph Lister as well. And Lister eventually would come up with carbolic spray that would be used to kind of disinfect the area. But the work that both of those moved towards was this idea of creating an environment which was sterile of germs. And so that included the use of plastic gloves. From about the 1880s, they're using plastic gloves, steam sterilising instruments so that they are clean. How does that help with the battlefields? Well, all medical staff would be instructed to wash their hands thoroughly, and they would, before they entered the theatre, would apply gloves and make sure the equipment they were using was clean and sterile. Air was supposed to be pumped in to the operating theatre. That's very difficult when you're underground, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And what they did is they used machines to kind of sterilise the surgical instruments. So you've got the gloves, the atmosphere, and the instruments being sterilised, which is fantastic because when the First World War comes along, the potential use is going to be in those theatres that are in dugouts, or those theatres that are in the casualty clearing stations that are going to need to reduce the infection level. The infection rates were quite high because there was no such thing as antibiotics that could tackle this or deal with this. As a consequence then, the potential problem for the First World War is how do you keep those instruments sterile? Where are you going to get all these gloves from? A lot of the time the surgical bases that you're going to be using will be in concrete dugouts. Let's take a minute to remember John McCrae's bunker, where he's in an advanced dressing station working on the different injuries coming in. And you've also got then in the casualty clearing stations possibly better equipment, but then with a vast number of soldiers that are coming in with all these wounds, it's very difficult to keep things sterile. So asepsis was there, it was a great idea, but then trying to actually do it on the front line in those dugouts was going to be tricky. Second one was X-rays. Now 1895, a guy called Wilhelm Röntgen discovers the X-ray, and one of the first X-ray pictures I think is his hand with his wedding ring still on. But the X-ray was a great way in the First World War to be able to identify where the shrapnel is inside the body. And there are a number of hospitals that were starting to use this in Britain from the kind of like late 19th century. So by the time we've got the First World War going on, we've got a lot of use of X-rays. Potential use in the First World War, like I said, it's hunting for objects, foreign objects inside the body that are metallic. So shrapnel bullets can easily be found. Potential pitfalls with the X-ray machines. These are big machines. Exposing people to X-rays is also quite harmful, having lots of doses of radiation. So finding a way that will protect the user and also making sure that the person gets the right amount of radiation given to them is important. So uses in the First World War, we've said problems are going to come down the line of getting the X-ray machines to the victims, with lots of people that have suffered from bullet wounds and things like that, shrapnel inside the body. It's actually getting the person to the machine. So how are they going to do that? And second of all, an X-ray can't pick up infection, and an X-ray can't pick up if there's clothing still been left in. Let's say you're doing a really fast operation to try and remove something, you get the bullet out, there might have been something dragged in with the bullet, like uniform fragments that you've sewn back up inside the body, and the infection is going to kill them. So the X-rays are there, it's just they're not necessarily at the right stage we want them to be, but wait, because things do get better for the X-ray machine. And thirdly, and finally, another method that is being used is blood blood transfusions have always been very, very tricky, and the first blood transfusions that take place are in the 1800s, successfully are in the 1800s, and they're about a 50% success rate. Why? Because they don't quite know what blood type people are, and that changes in 1901. So a guy called Karl Landsteiner discovers there are different blood groups. So if you can match the blood types, then you've got a way of being able to do that. And there were about 3 blood types being discovered by the early 1900s, by 1902 or 3. And as a result of that, it meant that when the First World War started, you could transfuse blood. So imagine the blood loss from injuries on the battlefield sites. Then your blood transfusions are going to be really important, and that's going to be key. Problems with that, okay, is getting the blood to the person that needs it. So at the moment, the only way you could transfuse is to have the donor right there next to you to transfuse it from person to person. That's fine until you get to a situation when you've got 30, 40, 50, hundreds of men that need maybe blood transfusions. You can't get one donor for each soldier. So how are you therefore going to store blood? So you need to have a way of storing blood. Secondly, once the blood is outside the body, it starts to coagulate. So you can also find another way of stopping the blood from starting to set the moment it comes out of the body. So you've got the storage of blood, and that's kind of linked to the idea of adding something maybe to blood to stop it from coagulating. And secondly, you've also got the idea of how do you get the blood to the person that needs it. It's all well and good collecting it perhaps in Britain, but then you've got to find a way of getting it to the soldiers that need it. So that's really your kind of your 3 types of issues here. You've got aseptic surgery, you've got X-rays being used to find bits and bobs in the body, and you've got blood transfusions. And that's all helpful in the First World War, but it equally comes down to problems as well. Transportation, storage, exposure in terms of X-rays, and then also the conditions that you're working in when we talk about aseptics. And that's it for kind of pre-1914 treatments. The other one that I will mention briefly now, though, which I'll pick up in our 6th video, is looking at how you integrate amputations in. Amputations have been going on for a very long time in medical history. It's in the First World War that we see amputations coming back because they need to remove limbs to stop infection from spreading. So in fact, by 1918, there was something on the lines of 240,000 men who have lost limbs as a result of amputation. And another thing that was being done at the time was wound excision, where they would cut away the dead flesh, again in the hopes that it wouldn't spread to the rest of the body. So there you've got your 3 primary treatments, and then obviously the major one that makes common sense is amputation, to remove limbs to stop the spread of infection, and that is going on at the time. But with new technology and new illnesses come new treatments, and in our next video we'll be looking at the kind of treatments that were introduced. Thank you very much.